Law, Legislation, and Liberty by Friedrich Hayek, Volume 2, The Mirage of Social Justice, 1976. Excerpts read by Jim Kelly. The Quest for Justice. We have chosen the term rules of just conduct to describe those end-independent rules which serve the formation of a spontaneous order, in contrast to the end-dependent rules of organization. The former are the nomos, which is at the basis of a private law society and makes an open society possible. The latter, so far as they are law, are the public law which determines the organization of government. Rules of just conduct refer to such actions of individuals as affect others. In a spontaneous order, the position of each individual is the result of the actions of many other individuals, and nobody has the responsibility or the power to assure that these separate actions of many will produce a particular result for a certain person. We shall see that what is called social or distributive justice is indeed meaningless within a spontaneous order and only has meaning within an organization. Rules of just conduct cannot protect all interests, not even all interests which to somebody are of great importance, but only what are called legitimate expectations, that is, expectations which the rules define and which the rules of law may sometimes have created in the first instance. The chief function of rules of just conduct is thus to tell each what he can count upon, what material objects or services he can use for his purposes, and what is the range of actions open to him. They cannot, if they are to secure to all the same freedom of decision, give similar assurance of what others will do, unless these others have voluntarily and for their own purposes consented to act in a particular manner. The rules of just conduct thus merely serve to prevent conflict and to facilitate cooperation by eliminating some sources of uncertainty. But since they aim at enabling each individual to act according to his own plans and decisions, they cannot wholly eliminate uncertainty. They can create certainty only to the extent that they protect means against the interference by others, and thus enable the individual to treat those means being at his disposal. But they cannot assure him success in the use of these means, neither insofar as it depends only on material facts, nor insofar as it depends on the actions of others which he expects. They can, for instance, not assure him that he will be able, at the expected price, to sell what he has to offer or to buy what he wants. To judge actions by rules, not by particular results, is a step which has made the open society possible. It is the device man has tumbled upon to overcome the ignorance of every individual of most of the particular facts which must determine the concrete order of a great society. Justice is thus emphatically not a balancing of particular interests at stake in a concrete case, or even the interests of determinable classes of persons, nor does it aim at bringing about a particular state of affairs which is regarded as just. It is not concerned with the results that a particular action will, in fact, bring about. Rules of just conduct are thus determined not by will or interest or any similar aim at particular results, but are developed through a persistent effort to bring consistency into a system of rules inherited by each generation. Social or distributive justice. The primary question then becomes whether there exists a moral duty to submit to a power which can coordinate the efforts of the members of society with the aim of achieving a particular pattern of distribution regarded as just. The appeal to social justice has by now become the most widely used and most effective argument in political discussion. Almost every claim for government action on behalf of particular groups is advanced in its name, and if it can be made to appear that a certain measure is demanded by social justice, opposition to it will rapidly weaken. People may dispute whether or not the particular measure is required by social justice, but that this is the standard which ought to guide political action, and that the expression has a definite meaning, is hardly ever questioned. In consequence, there are today probably no political movements or politicians who do not readily appeal to social justice in support of the particular measures which they advocate. It also can scarcely be denied that the demand for social justice has already in a great measure transformed the social order, and is continuing to transform it in a direction which those who called for it never foresaw. Though the phrase has undoubtedly helped occasionally to make the law more equal for all, whether the demand for justice and distribution has in any sense made society more just or reduced discontent must remain doubtful. The expression, of course, described from the beginning the aspirations which were at the heart of socialism. Although classical socialism has usually been defined by its demand for the socialization of the means of production, this was for it chiefly a means thought to be essential in order to bring about a just distribution of wealth. And since socialists have later discovered that this redistribution could in a great measure and against less resistance be brought about by taxation and the government services financed by it, and have in practice often shelved their earlier demands, the realization of social justice has become their chief promise. It might indeed be said that the main difference between the order of society at which classical liberalism aimed and the sort of society into which it is now being transformed is that the former was governed by principles of just individual conduct, while the new society is to satisfy the demands for social justice, or, in other words, that the former demanded just actions by the individuals, while the latter more and more places the duty of justice on authorities with power to command people what to do. The phrase could exercise this effect because it has gradually been taken over from the socialist, not only by all other political movements, but also by most teachers and preachers of morality. It seems, in particular, to have been embraced by a large section of the clergy of all Christian denominations, who, while increasingly losing their faith in a supernatural revelation, appear to have sought a refuge and consolation in a new social religion which substitutes a temporal for a celestial promise of justice, and who hope that they can thus continue their striving to do good. The Roman Catholic Church especially has made the aim of social justice part of its official doctrine, but the ministers of most Christian denominations appear to vie with each other with such offers of more mundane aims, which also seem to provide the chief foundation for renewed ecumenical efforts. The commitment to social justice has, in fact, become the chief outlet for moral emotion, the distinguishing attribute of the good man, and the recognized sign of the possession of a moral conscience. Though people may occasionally be perplexed to say which of the conflicting claims advanced in its name are valid, scarcely anyone doubts that the expression has a definite meaning, describes a high ideal, and points to grave defects of the existing social order which urgently call for correction. Even though until recently one would have vainly sought in the extensive literature for an intelligible definition of the term, there still seems to exist little doubt, either among ordinary people or among the learned, that the expression has a definite and well understood sense. But the near universal acceptance of a belief does not prove that it is valid or even meaningful, any more than the general belief in witches or ghosts prove the validity of those concepts. What we have to deal with in the case of social justice is simply a quasi-religious superstition of the kind which we should respectfully leave in peace so long as it merely makes those happy who hold it, but which we must fight when it becomes the pretext of coercing other men. And the prevailing belief in social justice is at present probably the greatest threat to most other values of a free civilization. It seems to be widely believed that social justice is just a new moral value which we must add to those that were recognized in the past, and that it can be fitted within the existing framework of moral rules. What is not sufficiently recognized is that, in order to give this phrase meaning, a complete change of the whole character of the social order will have to be effected, and that some of the values which used to govern it will have to be sacrificed. It is such a transformation of society into one of a fundamentally different type which is currently occurring piecemeal and without awareness of the outcome to which it must lead. It was in the belief that something like social justice could thereby be achieved that people have placed in the hands of government powers which it can now not refuse to employ in order to satisfy the claims of the ever-increasing number of special interests who have learnt to employ the open sesame of social justice. I believe that social justice will ultimately be recognized as a will-o'-the-wisp which has lured men to abandon many of the values which in the past have inspired the development of civilization, an attempt to satisfy a craving inherited from the traditions of the small group, but which is meaningless in the great society of free men. Unfortunately, this vague desire, which has become one of the strongest bonds spurring people of goodwill to action, not only is bound to be disappointed. This would be sad enough, but, like most attempts to pursue an unattainable goal, the striving for it will also produce highly undesirable consequences, and in particular to the destruction of the indispensable environment in which traditional moral values alone can flourish, namely personal freedom. The most common attempts to give meaning to the concept of social justice resort to egalitarian considerations and argue that every departure from equality of material benefits enjoyed has to be justified by some recognizable common interest which these differences serve. The prevalent demand for material equality is probably often based on the belief that the existing inequalities are the effect of somebody's decision, a belief which would be wholly mistaken in a genuine market order and has still only very limited validity in the highly interventionist mixed economy existing in most countries today. This now prevalent form of economic order has in fact attained its character largely as a result of governmental measures aiming at what was thought to be required by social justice. When the choice, however, is between a genuine market order, which does not and cannot achieve a distribution corresponding to any standard of material justice, and a system in which government uses its powers to put some such standard into effect, the question is not whether the government ought to exercise, justly or unjustly, powers it must exercise in any case, but whether government should possess and exercise additional powers, which can be used to determine the shares of the different members of society. The demand for social justice, in other words, does not merely require the government to observe some principle of action according to uniform rules in those actions which it must perform in any case, but demands that it undertake additional activities and thereby assume new responsibilities, tasks which are not necessary for maintaining law and order and providing certain collective needs which the market could not satisfy. Since people will differ in many attributes which the government cannot alter, to secure for them the same material position would require the government treat them very differently. Indeed, to assure the same material position to people who differ greatly in strength, intelligence, skill, knowledge, and perseverance, as well as in their physical and social environment, government would clearly have to treat them very differently to compensate for those disadvantages and deficiencies it could not directly alter. Once the rewards the individual can expect are no longer an appropriate indication of how to direct their efforts to where they are most needed, because these rewards correspond not to the value which their services have for their fellows, but to the moral merit the persons are deemed to have earned, they lose the guiding function they have in the market order and would have to be replaced by the commands of the directing authority. A central planning office would, however, have to decide on the tasks to be allotted to the different groups or individuals wholly on grounds of expediency or efficiency, and, in order to achieve its ends, would have to impose upon them very different duties and burdens. The individuals might be treated according to uniform rules so far as their rewards were concerned, but certainly not with respect to the different kinds of works they would have to be made to do. In assigning people to their different tasks, the central planning authority would have to be guided by considerations of efficiency and expediency and not by principles of justice or equality. No less than in the market order would the individuals in the common interest have to submit to great inequality. Only these inequalities would be determined not by the interaction of individual skills in an impersonal process, but by the uncontradictable decision of authority. As is becoming clear in the ever-increasing fields of welfare policy, an authority instructed to achieve particular results for the individuals must be given essentially arbitrary powers to make the individuals do what seems necessary to achieve the required results. Full equality for most cannot but mean the equal submission of the great masses under the command of some elite who manages their affairs. While an equality of rights under a limited government is possible, and an essential condition of individual freedom, a claim for equality of material position can be met only by a government with totalitarian powers. We are, of course, not wrong when we perceive that the effects on the different individuals and groups of the economic processes of a free society are not distributed according to some recognizable principle of justice. Where we go wrong is in concluding from this that they are unjust, and that somebody is responsible and to be blamed for this. In a free society in which the position of the different individuals and groups is not the result of anybody's design, or could within such society not be altered in accordance with a principle of general applicability, the differences in rewards cannot meaningfully be described as just or unjust. It is, of course, not to be denied that in the existing market order, not only the results, but also the initial chances of different individuals are often very different. They are affected by circumstances of their physical and social environment which are beyond their control, but in many particular respects might be altered by some governmental action. The demand for equality of opportunity or equal starting conditions appeals to and has been supported by many who, in general, favor the free market order. There's also much to be said in favor of the government providing on an equal basis the means for the schooling of minors who are not yet fully responsible citizens, even though there are grave doubts whether we ought to allow the government to administer them. But all this would still be very far from creating real equality of opportunity, even for persons possessing the same abilities. To achieve this, government would have to control the whole physical and human environment of all persons and have to endeavor to provide at least equivalent chances for each. And the more government succeeded in these endeavors, the stronger would become the legitimate demand that, on the same principle, any still remaining handicaps must be removed, or compensated for by putting extra burden on the still relatively favored. This would have to go on until government literally controlled every circumstance which could affect any person's well-being. Attractive as the phrase equality of opportunity at first sounds, once the idea is extended beyond the facilities which, for other reasons, have to be provided by government, it becomes a wholly illusory ideal, and any attempt concretely to realize it apt to produce a nightmare. The idea that men ought to be rewarded in accordance with the assessed merits or deserts of their services to society presupposes an authority which not only distributes these rewards, but also assigns to the individuals the task for the performance of which they will be rewarded. In other words, if social justice is to be brought about, the individuals must be required to obey not merely general rules, but specific demands directed to them only. The type of social order in which the individuals are directed to serve a single system of ends is the organization, and not the spontaneous order of the market. That is, not a system in which the individual is free, because bound only by general rules of just conduct, but a system in which all are subject to specific directions by authority. What I hope to have made clear is that the phrase social justice is not, as most people probably feel, an innocent expression of goodwill towards the less fortunate, but that it has become a dishonest insinuation that one ought to agree to a demand of some special interest or person which can give no real reason for it. If political discussion is to become honest, it is necessary that people should recognize that the term is intellectually disreputable, the mark of demagoguery or cheap journalism, which responsible thinkers ought to be ashamed to use because, once its vacuity is recognized, its use is dishonest. We are touching here upon a problem which, with all its ramifications, is much too big to try to be examined here systematically, but which must at least be mentioned briefly. It is that we can't have any morals we like or dream of. Morals, to be viable, must satisfy certain requirements which we may not be able to specify, but may only be able to find out by trial and error. What is required is not merely consistency or compatibility of the rules as well as the acts demanded by them. A system of morals must also produce a functioning order, capable of maintaining the apparatus of civilization which it presupposes. We are not familiar with the concept of non-viable systems of morals, and certainly cannot observe them anywhere in practice, since the societies which try them rapidly disappear. But they are being preached, often by widely revered saintly figures, and the societies in decay which we can observe are often societies which have been listening to the teaching of such moral reformers and still revere the destroyers of their society as good men. More often, however, the gospel of social justice aims at much more sordid sentiments, the dislike of people who are better off than oneself, or simply envy, that, quote, most antisocial and evil of all passions, end quote, as John Stuart Mill cited it. That animosity towards great wealth, which represents it as a scandal that some should enjoy riches while others have basic needs unsatisfied, and camouflages under the name of justice what has nothing to do with justice. What those who attack great private wealth do not understand is that it is neither by physical effort nor by the mere act of saving and investing, but by directing resources to the most productive uses, that wealth is chiefly created. And there can be no doubt that most of those who have built up great fortunes in the form of new industrial plants and like have therefore benefited more people through creating opportunities for more rewarding employment than if they had given their superfluity away to the poor. The suggestion that, in these cases, those to whom in fact the workers are most indebted do wrong rather than greatly benefit them is an absurdity. In fact, The systematic pursuit of the foolish fire of social justice, which we call socialism, is based throughout on the atrocious idea that political power ought to determine the material position of the different individuals and groups, an idea defended by the false assertion that this must always be so, and socialism merely wishes to transfer this power from the privileged to the most numerous class. It was the great merit of the market order, as it has been spread during the last 2 centuries, that it deprived everyone of such power, which can be used only in arbitrary fashion. It had indeed brought about the greatest reduction of arbitrary power ever achieved. This greatest triumph of personal freedom, the seduction of social justice, threatens again to take from us. And it will not be long before the holders of the power to enforce social justice will entrench themselves in their position by awarding the benefits of social justice as a remuneration for the conferment of that power, and in order to secure to themselves the support of a Praetorian Guard, which will make it certain that their view of what is social. The transition from the negative conception of justice as defined by rules of individual conduct to a positive conception, which makes it a duty of society to see that individuals have particular things, is often effected by stressing the rights of the individual. It seems that, among the younger generation, the welfare institutions into which they have been born have engendered a feeling that they have a claim in justice on society for the provision of particular things which it is the duty of that society to provide. However strong this feeling may be, its existence does not prove that the claim has anything to do with justice, or that such claims can be satisfied in a free society. Justice does not impose on our fellows a general duty to provide for us, and a claim to such a provision can only exist to the extent that we are maintaining an organization for that purpose. It is meaningless to speak of a right to a condition which nobody has the duty, or perhaps even the power, to bring about. It is equally meaningless to speak of right in the sense of a claim on a spontaneous order such as society, unless this is meant to imply that somebody has the duty of transforming that cosmos into an organization, and thereby to assume the power of controlling its results. The time-honored political and civil rights which have been embodied in formal bills of rights constitute essentially a demand that, so far as the power of government extends, it ought to be used justly. It may well be desirable that these rights should become truly universal as a result of all governments submitting to them. But so long as the powers of the several governments are at all limited, these rights cannot produce a duty of the governments to bring about a particular state of affairs. What we can require is that, so far as government acts, it ought to act justly. But we cannot derive from political and civil rights any positive powers government ought to have. They leave wholly open the question whether the organization for coercion, which we call government, can and ought, in justice, be used to determine the particular material position of the several individuals or groups. To the negative rights, which are merely a complement of the rules protecting individual domains and which have been institutionalized in the charters of organization of governments, and to the positive rights of citizens to participate in the direction of this organization, there have recently been added new positive social and economic rights for which an equal or even higher dignity is claimed. These are claims to particular benefits to which every human being, as such, is presumed to be entitled without any indication as to who is to be under the obligation to provide those benefits, or by what process they are to be provided. Such positive rights, however, demand as their counterpart a decision that somebody, either a person or organization, should have the duty of providing what the others are to have. It is, of course, meaningless to describe them as claims on society, because society cannot think, act, value, or treat anybody in a particular way. If such claims are to be met, the spontaneous order which we call society must be replaced by a deliberately directed organization. The cosmos of the market would have to be replaced by a taxis, whose members would have to do what they are instructed to do. They could not be allowed to use their knowledge for their own purposes, but would have to carry out the plan which their rulers have designed to meet the needs to be satisfied. From this it follows that the old civil rights and the new social and economic rights cannot be achieved at the same time, but are in fact incompatible. The new rights could not be enforced by law without at the same time destroying that liberal order at which the old civil rights aim. The new trend was given its chief impetus through the proclamation by President Franklin Roosevelt of his four freedoms, which included freedom from want and freedom from fear, together with the old freedom of speech and freedom of worship. But it found its definite embodiment only in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1948. This document is admittedly an attempt to fuse the rights of the Western liberal tradition with the altogether different conception deriving from the Marxist Russian Revolution. It adds to the list of the classical civil rights enumerated in its first 21 articles 7 further guarantees intended to express the new social and economic rights. In these additional clauses, quote, everyone as a member of society, quote, is assured the satisfaction of positive claims to particular benefits without at the same time placing on anyone the duty or burden of providing them. The document also completely fails to define these rights in such a manner that a court could possibly determine what their contents are in a particular instance. What, for instance, can be the legal meaning of the statement that, quote, everyone is entitled to the realization of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and free development of his personality? Against whom is every one to have a claim to just and favorable conditions of work, and to just and favorable employment? What are the consequences of the requirement that every one should have the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community and to share in the scientific advances and its benefits? Everyone is even said to be entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration are fully realized, on the assumption, apparently, that not only is this possible, but that there exists now a known method by which these claims can be satisfied for all men. It is evident that these rights are based on the interpretation of society as a deliberately made organization by which everybody is employed. They cannot be made universal within a system of rules of just conduct based on the conception of individual responsibility, and so require that the whole of society be converted into a single organization, that is, made totalitarian in the fullest sense of the word. We have seen that rules of just conduct which apply to everybody alike, but subject nobody to the commands of a superior, can never determine what particular things any person is to have. They can never take the form of everybody must have so-and-so. In a free society, what the individual get must always depend in some measure on particular circumstances which nobody can foresee and nobody has the power to determine. Rules of just conduct, therefore, never confer on any person as such, as distinct from the members of a particular organization, a claim to a particular thing. They can bring about only opportunities for the acquiring of such claims. The whole Universal Declaration of Human Rights is indeed couched in that jargon of organization thinking which one has learnt to expect in the pronouncement of trade union officials or the International Labor Organization, and reflects an attitude business employees share with civil servants and the organization men of the big corporations, but which is altogether inconsistent with the principles on which the order of a great society rests. If the document were merely the production of an international group of social philosophers, as in origin it is, it would constitute only somewhat disturbing evidence of the degree to which organization thinking has permeated the thinking of these social philosophers, and how much they have become total strangers to the basic ideals of a free society. But its acceptance by a body of presumably responsible statesmen, seriously concerned with the creation of a peaceful international order, gives cause for much greater apprehension. Organization thinking, largely as a result of the sway of the rationalist constructivism of Plato and his followers, has long been the besetting vice of social philosophers. Perhaps it should therefore not surprise us that academic philosophers, in their sheltered lives as members of organizations, should have lost all understanding of the forces which hold the great society together, and, imagining themselves to be Platonic philosopher kings, should propose a reorganization of society on totalitarian lines. If it should be told, as we are told, that the social and economic rights of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights would today be, quote, accepted by the vast majority of American and British moralists, end quote, this would merely indicate a sorry lack of critical acumen on the part of these thinkers. The spectacle, however, of the General Assembly of the United Nations solemnly proclaiming that every individual, quote, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, quote, should strive to ensure the universal observation of those human rights, would be merely comic if the illusions which this creates were not so profoundly tragic. To see the most comprehensive authority which man has yet created undermining the respect it ought to command by giving countenance to the naive prejudice that we can create any state of affairs which we think to be desirable by simply decreeing that it ought to exist, and indulging in the self-deception that we can benefit from the spontaneous order of society and at the same time mold it to our own will, is more than merely tragic. The fundamental fact which these illusions disregard is that the availability of all those benefits which we wish as many people as possible to have depends on these same people using for their production their own best knowledge. To establish enforceable rights to the benefits is not likely to produce them. If we wish everybody to be well off, we shall get closer to our goal not by commanding by law that this should be achieved, or giving everybody a legal claim to what we think he ought to have, but by providing inducements for all to do as much as they can that will benefit others. To speak of rights where what are in question are merely aspirations which only a voluntary system can fulfill, not only misdirects attention from what are the effective determinants